It's 6:30, so we will start. I'm Barbara Lee Van Horsen. I am the experimenter at the Momentum Center, a grassroots movement to create a stigma-free community, and the convener of the Anti-Racism Task Force. So you can see the members of the task force in front of you. They are responsible for this series of town halls that we're presenting, and I'm grateful that you're here to participate. I do have to give a warning. At the very first town hall, we were Zoom bombed. We have installed all of the security measures we can. In fact, we tested one tonight. We found that we can very quickly and effectively remove anybody from the meeting who does not abide by the ground rules. Right now, we're finding difficulty getting them back in if we were just testing. So it's an interesting experiment, but I can assure you that all of the measures have been put in place to keep an unfortunate event from happening again, and that if it does, we can resolve it right away. Again, these are the members of the Anti-Racism Task Force. As you see those people, if you visit those businesses, please thank them for their support of this work. A few other the task force has done. We have a very comprehensive resource list that I invite you to check out. There's a community book club led by Wes McGee. We've added reflection and action buttons to the website, and those are available. You might have seen them as you were signing in for this town hall. We have been supporting county DEI initiatives. We've created window clings that are available for people to put in their homes or their businesses, and we have created a partnership with A Long Talk. Another thing we've done is create a couple of different videos. This one is the county's DEI statement.
Reconocemos la importancia de la diversidad, la equidad y la inclusión en el logro de nuestra misión y lo consideramos un valor básico para involucrarnos de manera proactiva y comprender una variedad de perspectivas a través de todas las diferencias humanas. Buscamos asegurar un trato respetuoso y justo y el mismo acceso a oportunidades y recursos para que todas las personas puedan prosperar y alcanzar su máximo potencial. Creemos que la voz de cada persona agrega valor.
We recognize the importance of diversity, equity, and inclusion in the accomplishment of our mission, and we hold it as a basic value to proactively engage and understand a variety of perspectives across all human differences. We seek to ensure respectful, fair treatment, and full, equal access to opportunities and resources so all people may thrive and achieve their full potential. We believe every person's voice adds value.
And as we begin our time together, we also pause to acknowledge the land on which we gather from our various places as we come together virtually. We recognize the people of the three fires, the Ojibwa, the Ottawa, and the Potawatomi people, on whose land we are gathered. The three fires people are indigenous to this land, which means that it is their ancestral territory. Every university, congregation, institution, business, and monument here in West Michigan is built on stolen native land. We are guests on their land, and one way to practice right relations is to develop genuine ways to acknowledge the histories and traditions of the people who originated here first, who are still here, and who tend to the land always. As we make this land acknowledgement, we know it is but an important first step, and that there are many more that we need to take when we decide to engage in the important work of social justice and equity. Tonight, Our conversations around social justice and equity are a continuation of our conversation on religion and racism. This is the third in the series, and tonight our topic is interfaith perspectives and racism, on racism. We have three amazing speakers tonight: Zahabia Ahmed Usmani, who is Muslim, David Fair, who is Jewish, and Tangjin Su, who is Buddhist. I want to mention that each of them will speak to us about their experience of their faith tradition and that tradition in relation to racism, but they don't represent the entire faith tradition of which they belong. We always want to make sure that we're not expecting one person to speak to an entire tradition or a tradition or an entire group of people. We're very grateful for their sharing their individual experiences and observations with us. Our general format, if you haven't been to a town hall before, we begin with welcome and instructions, and then we hear from each of our panelists. They'll each speak for 10 minutes, and then we'll go into questions and answers. After that, we'll go into breakout sessions. So we'll have an opportunity for small group conversation. We'll end with some polling and talking about next steps. A few instructions for tonight. Please keep yourself on mute unless you're a facilitator, and when you're asked to unmute yourself, we'll ask you to do that. We do have closed captioning, so you can turn your subtitles on if you desire that. We ask you to submit your questions and your comments via the chat box. And we will ask those. Mary Jane will be fielding those questions and asking them of the participants as we go. So feel free to submit questions and comments at any time. In order to participate in the breakout sessions, you do need to have the Zoom app downloaded on your computer or your phone. You can't do it just from the link. So hopefully you've downloaded the app so that you can participate in those breakout sessions. We do ask you as much as possible to keep your camera on, especially in the small group. It really helps to build trust and transparency when we can see each other instead of just a blank screen. We will, as part of our next steps, provide this entire recording to everybody who's participating tonight, and we'll also follow up with debriefing and action steps that might emerge from this conversation. Finally, we have communication guidelines and ground rules to review. The first is that we are here for an honest conversation. We're not here to debate. It's not about somebody being right or somebody being wrong, but an opportunity for us to share our honest thoughts, experiences, beliefs, and to be willing to listen to the thoughts, experiences, and beliefs of others. Equality, that we have speakers who come with a particular viewpoint, and we're very grateful for that, but we're all equal and valuable contributors to the conversation. Respect. All of us have preconceived ideas that can get in the way of our listening to each other, so we want to be aware of that so we can remain respectful. We want to practice active listening, which can be a particular challenge in our multimedia world and on Zoom. So please try to pay attention and give your attention to whoever is speaking. Rather than thinking about what you want to say, you'll have that opportunity. Responsibility. We want to take responsibility for what we say and for what we feel. All of us have hot buttons that can get pushed unintentionally. If that happens, we want to be able to name it without blaming somebody else for it. And finally, we work hard to create a shame-free zone. We need to have those spaces where we are able to unpack our questions, the thoughts, the things that we've been carrying around with us so that we can look at them objectively and maybe with somebody else's eyes and decide whether we want to continue carrying those with us or not. So it is a shame-free zone. If anybody has difficulty with these particular guidelines and ground rules, then this might not be the right time to engage in this conversation. And you might want to consider leaving this conversation now and joining again when these ground rules make more sense for you. As I said, we will be enforcing these ground rules through the remainder of the night. So I want to start with a pre-polling question or two. The first one, and these are both attached, so we have to scroll down, It says the first one is a question of your confidence talking about race and racism. So, on a scale of 1 to 10, where 1 is I have no confidence talking about racism, and 10 is I am completely confident, if you would just rank 1 to 10. The second question is about how present racism is in our community. Not at all, minimally, somewhat, regularly, or always, because the problem is systemic. So please take a moment to answer those two questions. And once you make those selections, you do have to hit the submit button for your answers to be registered. And we'll leave that up for about 10 more seconds. Please just answer those two questions. There we go. We're getting a run of answers now. And I will close it in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And I'll share these results with you. Right now, the participants in the room have a comfort level of 4 to 10 with talking about race and racism. And we have 15% of people who feel racism is somewhat present, 12% regularly, and 73% see it as a systemic issue. So thank you for giving us those baseline numbers to begin with. And with that, I want to turn things over to our first speaker, Zahabia, who who is Muslim and can talk to us about her experience and thoughts regarding her faith and racism. So Zahabia, if you would unmute yourself, you have 10 minutes.
Thank you very much. I'm going to pull up my notes. Okay. Thank you all for allowing us to be here today. I just really wanted to share, like when the Kaufman Interfaith Institute was working with Barbara on this panel, we really thought it was important to have interfaith voices present because often in our community, faith is equated with Christianity. And we wanted to show the community that to broaden their idea of what faith means. So hence the Interfaith Voices for tonight. So I'm grateful to be in the esteemed company of the other speakers and you all as well. So honestly, before starting this, I just have to say I was just a little word of caution. As most of you probably know, many Christians, you have many then examples of Christianity. So please be aware that as I and other panelists share, that our examples and what we talk about should be examples of the illness of racism that plagues us. And it's irrespective of our traditions and is not another example of why a particular religion is bad or not good. So as far as getting into, thank you, Tanjan, I saw you clapping. As we get into the tradition, I just want to talk about within the religion itself, what I have experienced being, I'm probably not what you imagine. I don't know if you closed your eyes and imagined for a moment what a Muslim would look like to you. Probably isn't someone like me. Maybe the woman you imagine is wearing a hijab. Maybe they have lighter skin than I do. Maybe, they're a man with a turban on, which you might be thinking of a Sikh and not a Muslim, or many of you probably do think of me or someone like me because we're not monolithic. But one thing that often happens in mosque communities is that they are predominantly one racial or ethnic group. So there's often this bias that will exist between Arab versus non-Arab, Arabic speaking versus non-Arabic speaking. And this bias is sometimes is something that a lot of people, maybe even from non-Arabic speaking parts of the world, have internalized and even see this as an inferiority that they have inside of themselves, making them maybe feel less Muslim than somebody who knows Arabic, since Arabic is the language of the Quran, which is our holy book. And so it creates this great deal of tension for us. And it sometimes even creates this feeling of not feeling particularly at home. in our places of worship, our mosques or our masjids. And so for that reason, that is one of the things that we as a community are grappling with. There's also work that Muslims need to do to better understand our religion amongst ourselves. So one of the most important, if you don't mind me sharing a story really quick from our tradition, one of the most important companions of the Prophet was a man named Bilal. He was enslaved and tortured in every way by the ruler of Mecca. And before Islam, this was all before Islam gained control of Mecca. So it was like a non-Muslim polytheistic person. Bilal, before knowing about Islam, had this intense faith in the oneness of God, which enraged this ruler, and it totally inspired the Muslims who were trying to spread the message of Islam in Arabia. So after a great deal of torture by the ruler to get Bilal to recant his belief, which just wasn't working despite him being on the verge of death now, the ruler eventually said that he would sell Bilal to Abu Bakr, who was the father-in-law of the Prophet, for a great deal of money. Abu Bakr accepted immediately. And the ruler then ended up saying, well, I would have sold him for like 1 cent, and then trying to make Bilal seem worthless. And Abu Bakr said that he would have paid any amount to get his freedom because he was priceless. His intensity of his belief in the oneness of God was so intense. And so Bilal, of course, was freed and ended up being like the closest bestie to the companion to the Prophet Muhammad. He was the first treasure of Islam. He was the most trusted confidant, the most likely to be with the Prophet, the first to perform the call to prayers. And he exclusively made the call to prayers when the Prophet led the prayers. And he was the first to climb to the top of the Kaaba in Mecca when that ruler who had tortured him was overthrown. And as he was climbing to the top of the Kaaba to do the call to prayers, as Prophet Muhammad had instructed him to do, there were Muslims who were insulting him and calling him the son of a slave. And then that is when this verse that most of the time you'll hear Muslims talk about when they talk about diversity and inclusion in Islam was revealed from the Quran. Chapter 43, verse 13 says, "O mankind, indeed we created you from male and female and made you people and tribes that you may know each other. Indeed, the most noble of you in the sight of Allah is the most righteous of you. Indeed, Allah is all knowing and aware." This verse is one of the most cited, as I said, when we talk about diversity in the Islamic perspective. But the importance of it cannot be lost. It was a reminder that when the ugly head of racism creeps up, that we need to remember the goal of this ideal, and that we need to recognize that the desire to break up into tribes and into in-groups and out-groups exists within us as people, and that God knows our nature to let things that aren't important, like race, culture, gender, skin color, which lead to oppression and discrimination, need to be combated. Therefore, our work is to focus on our deeds and not to look at anybody's skin color and other things that might divide us. So that was a little bit from the teachings of Islam and how we as a Muslim community experience racism and experience othering, but that's something that isn't in our tradition that we need to come back to and work against. So one of the things I also want to talk about is within our community, we need to do better with getting more women on boards and being more inclusive and having their voice be incorporated instead of just having it sort of be a token position. And we need to sort of, hearkening back to what Pastor Denise said last time, decolonize our thoughts and institutions, which have predominantly maintained like the structure that they maintained so many years ago, which needs to change. Finally, I want to get into just a couple of minutes about Islamophobia. I think I have about 3 minutes left. There's a wonderful organization called the Institute for Social Policy Understanding, ISPU for short, which does research on on Muslim Americans and just in general their experience and what's happening in the Muslim world. And their research shows that Islamophobia is of course on the rise. We all know this. That white evangelicals score the highest. With about 44% of them holding unfavorable opinions about Muslims, twice as many as those that hold favorable opinions of Muslims. And interestingly, Hispanic Americans are 5 times as likely to hold favorable opinions of Muslims than they are to have negative attitudes, which is kind of cool. I wonder what it is in the Latino community that is resonating with them. There's lots of other scores like that, but honestly, in my personal experience, what I can say is that, I pass. I have this privilege of passing. Most people don't look at me and see a Muslim. And I do hear the Islamophobic comments, and I do have that opportunity to then befriend those people and to try to develop an understanding with them because of the nature of me not wearing a hijab. I look more Latina than I look maybe Muslim, even though that's a total myth. We know Muslims come from all over the world and look all different ways. But yeah, so that is one of the things that we could really use your help on, is just, understanding that Muslims share a lot of the same morals and prophets and a lot of the same examples as Christianity, and, stepping up when you do see Islamophobia creep its ugly head, and combat against that. So yeah, I think I'm like right at time, Barbara.
Okay, thank you so much, Zahabi. I really appreciate everything you had to share. Um, if you have questions for Zahabia, please feel free to go ahead and start submitting those. We'll do all of the questions after all of our speakers have spoken, but please go ahead and start asking those questions. And as you do ask questions, if you have a question specifically for Zahabia or either of the other speakers, please designate that as well. Otherwise, we'll randomly ask. And with that, I'd like to introduce David Fair, who is Jewish and the cantor in Grand Rapids. So, David, welcome. You have 10 minutes.
Hey, everybody. I'm so glad to meet you all. I'm so glad to see you all. I'm setting my clock right now. All right. So, hi. Hello. So, I am cantor David Fair. I moved here to start my new job on July the 1st. So I am new to Grand Rapids, but I'm discovering things very quickly, and it's wonderful actually here. However, being in Grand Rapids poses some interesting challenges in regards to race. So since y'all don't know me at all, let me tell you all who I am, what I am proud of about myself. I am Jewish and I am Black. My mother was a white Jewish woman, and my father was a Black Christian man, although I am not part of some sort of interfaith household or dual faith household. It was a Jewish household. My dad just didn't do any Jewish activities with us. I grew up in Baltimore, Maryland. So I don't know any of your experience with Jewish people, but I'll start from a very rudimentary level. Most Jewish people in the United States are white. Most Jewish people descend from the Jews of Eastern Europe. So that means Russia, Poland, Lithuania, Minsk, Belarus, etc. My Jewish family comes from Minsk. And what has happened is that because the grand majority of Jews in the United States are white, it is unbelievable to many people that there are Jews who are not white. In fact, there are Jews who come from Ethiopia, from Sudan, Uganda, Iraq, Iran, Yemen, Morocco, etc., etc. There are also Jews who look like me, and there are Jews of color who converted to Judaism. So we are not all white people. Now, what really boils my blood in Jewish spaces is that so many white Jewish people really reject that I just called them white. Almost every Jew I know says, I am not white, I'm Jewish. How could I be white? My family was not slave owners. And plus there's anti-Semitism. We were victims of the Holocaust. How could you say we are in power or we have privilege? And I will always educate Jewish white people by telling them that those things are true. Your family may not have owned slaves. Your family may be survivors of anti-Semitism, but that doesn't mean that you do not benefit from passing as white in this society. You are not denied college admission because of your skin color. You are not discriminated against when it comes to buying a home in a fancy neighborhood. You may have lots of stresses in your life. You may be financially struggling, but that does not have anything to do with your skin color, does it? Your problems, you may have 99 problems in this world, but your skin color is not one of them, right? Because you pass as white. So when people say, I'm not white, how dare you call me that? What I hear in my head is, you think that racism is something that has nothing to do with you. You have no responsibility to addressing racism. You are 100% not part of any problem. Racism is something that exists outside of you. Other white people have to be accountable for racism. Not me, says the white Jew, and I say that's not correct. There are lots of things that you can do to be an anti-racist in our culture, but that is something that applies to all white people. And even me, I like to tell white Jewish people, do you think that I have never committed a racist act in my life? Do you think that I never get irritated when I'm on the phone with the Chinese restaurant and I can't understand them? Do you think that I have never assumed that because of someone's skin color, that they were not the manager, that they were not a doctor? Do you think that I have not been in work environments where everybody is white and I've never gone to my supervisor and said, I think we need to hire some people of color here? I am guilty of all of that. But the thing is, I recognize that about myself and I challenge my racism. I am always trying to say, what have I done that is not helpful, and how can I look at my actions and improve? So, what happens a lot in Jewish spaces is that a person of color will walk in the door and the white Jewish people sort of avoid them, or they get a lot of looks, but nobody's going up to them and saying, hi, I haven't met you, have I? I'm Margaret, nice to meet you. And I always encourage every white Jew to do that when they see a person of color walk in, because that person will be the only person of color in the room, most likely. Now, unfortunately, what happens in a lot of Jewish spaces, in fact, every Jewish space, a person of color will be asked, when did you convert to Judaism? And that is against Jewish law. You are never to ask any person, are they a convert to Judaism? But people, that flies out of their minds when they meet a person of color, because they feel, how can you possibly be Jewish? Or they'll be asked, when did you convert? How are you Jewish? Or some people are frankly just not believed. So people of color feel like outsiders, especially because white Jewish people tend to feel that being Jewish is a race. And we have never been a race. In the Torah, the Jewish people were described as an Erev Rav, which means a mixed multitude. Being Jewish is not a race. Being Jewish is being part of a people. We are a people, we are not a race. So let me tell you about some personal experiences I've had. So I am the head of our religious school as well as the cantor. And something that I wanted to do that I knew would be very beneficial to the children in our school. And by the way, we do have a whole family. In fact, we have two families that are Jews of color, but of course, the grand majority are white. I thought it was a really beautiful thing at the beginning of every of our worship services for the children. I would show 5 minutes of a Jew of color who's a musician performing. And we would talk about this person and who they are. And I had a lot of Ethiopian Jews, Sudanese Jews, even Nissim Black, who is a Black American man who immigrated to Israel and is now Israeli and who is a wonderful rapper. Angela Bookdahl is the rabbi of Central Synagogue in New York, and she is Asian. So I was doing this like every Sunday, and I started to get an enormous amount of complaints from parents. Parents accused me of, well, they called me racist because they said our children cannot see themselves in these people of color that you are showing. You are making them feel othered, and they don't see themselves, and they are feeling guilty. So that is what I'm putting up with. Never mind that every single Jewish role model they have ever encountered has been a white person. The fact that I have shown them, these people, has been so offensive. So that's been a real challenge that I've had to go through. I was in Chicago. My partner, his niece was having her bat mitzvah, and I walk into the synagogue, and the security just jumps on me. They don't literally jump on me. They come up to me. They were rather aggressive. I was coming from the airport and I had luggage with me. Oh, my alarm just went off. And oh my God, they were so aggressive. They were basically interrogating me, and they never once asked to look in the luggage. So I know it wasn't the luggage. It was because of my skin color. I have a lot more instances of racism I could tell you all about that I have encountered, but my time is up. And I want to thank you all for being open to listening to my story.
Thank you so much, David. So appreciate your story. Please put your questions for David in chat and we will get to those after we hear from Tongjin Su. And Tongjin, I apologize. I realize that your name was spelled on that initial slide incorrectly. I made that change, but please feel free to unmute yourself and you have the next 10 minutes.
Sweet. All right, let me start my clock as well, pull up my notes. Thank you so much for having me. As Barbara already said, my Dharma name, in Dharma circles, you usually get some special name after certain vows, right? So my Dharma name is Tongjin Su, but my given name is Caleb. So I think like at the outset, what I want to acknowledge, recognize, right? In contrast to David and Zahabia is that I'm a white dude, right? And whereas they can speak to instances of encountering racism in their daily lives, I have not had that misfortune, right? Because generally, and for the most part, I benefit from the privileged system that we have, the system of white supremacy, right? And I think being asked to speak tonight, I find myself in a unique position because I'm Buddhist, right? And there's definitely plenty of discrimination specifically in the States directed at Jews, right? Or Islamophobia directed at Muslims, right? But Buddhists are in at least the United States, kind of like famously beloved, it seems, or like we I don't know, we don't do a lot to make other people mad, seemingly, right? So what I want to talk to more tonight is how the Buddhist community in the States has responded to racism, especially the Black Lives Matter movement and other events of the past 5 or 6 years. In preparing, I realized that there was plenty that could be said about sort of the Orientalist attitudes and views of the Westerners, first drawn to the mysterious or exotic wisdom of the East, you know, those who first brought Buddhism to the West. But I don't want to dwell too deeply on that topic. It's a deep mine, but I don't think it's as pertinent as talking about how Dharma communities here in America today are responding to racism, especially after the events of last summer. So how are Buddhists today responding and contributing to this ongoing national dialogue, right? So yeah, like me, most Buddhist spaces, but not all, are white, progressive, and well-meaning. But as we all know, the what is it? The road to hell is paved with good intentions, right? So I was actually really delighted when I saw it on the flyer that the recommended reading for today was Lamarad Owens' book Love and Rage, because Lamarad Owens represents, I think, what a really astounding movement within Buddhism today. That is, there's just a growing contingent of practitioners who are Black, and whereas the initial interpreters, practitioners in America and Europe who popularized Buddhism here or spread it beyond, you know, the also Japanese and Chinese and Korean people who brought it to the States. Like, everyone brings their own perspectives to a text, right? And in encountering the teachings of the Buddha, people like Lamarad Owens, Reverend Kyoto Williams, Kate Johnson, and many others are bringing Buddhism into dialogue with the radical Black prophetic tradition, right? People like Malcolm X. And what you often encounter in Dharma spaces, being generally white and well-meaning, right, is that when the topic of racism is raised, it's not a very popular topic to talk about. A lot of people poo-poo it. They don't want to talk about it. They say it's divisive. Or someone told me the other day to not bring politics into enlightenment. Or yeah, like there's this general refusal to even talk about it because somehow contributing attention to the subject is to help its perpetuation. Like, there seems to be an implication that ignoring it will make it go away, which is obviously not the case, right? So I think one thing that's difficult about talking about racism with Buddhists is that throughout the tradition, there's this whole dialogue about the sort of the absolute and the relative. The experience of enlightenment is held to be the experience of ultimate reality, right? It's the 10,000-foot view. And at the 10,000-foot view, race doesn't exist, right? And I think that is the first teaching offered at a lot of like anti-racism workshops, books, webinars, etc., right? Ultimately, race is a construct, right? Created in the 16th century by European colonialists in order to justify the system of the transatlantic slave trade. So yes, cool, it's a construct, you intellectually deconstructed it. But a friend of mine pointed this out the other day. You can point out that a dollar is just a piece of paper, but that doesn't stop it from having value, right? So I think what's difficult is, yeah, like Buddhists will say, oh, well, race is just an identity, right? And Lama Rod Owens points to this too. There's this like fear or apprehension in Buddhist circles about really talking about identity in general, because the Buddhists or the Buddha taught the existence of no self. And while that's a rabbit hole to go into, that is used in a quick fashion to say, oh, well, you can't attach to any identity marker because that is getting yourself engaged in dualistic thinking, and dualistic thinking is what causes suffering, right? So I feel like it's a completely inappropriate thing to say, though, because if you have more and more Black and queer practitioners of Buddhism coming to you and saying, I'm suffering because I am queer, I'm suffering because I am Black, right? And the Buddha's first noble truth is there is suffering in the world. And you look at the person and say, no, your suffering doesn't exist. You just need to get rid of this identity marker. That doesn't, I don't know, it seems like a really inappropriate thing to say to someone who is suffering at the hands of prejudice, right? So I think, I'm checking my notes here. I think going back to this like contrast between the 10,000 foot view and racism being a social construct, right? Is that, right, deconstructing race doesn't stop racism from existing. Like if that were the case, then why are Black women more likely to die in childbirth? Or why is the majority of our incarcerated population Black men, right? So we can strive for the absolute in our practice, but must recognize that we live on the level of the relative. And on the relative, we are suffering, right? And we all encounter different forms of suffering. And some of us don't just have the bourgeoisie suffering of like emotional ups and downs, disappointment at things not going our way. Some of us encounter the really real nitty gritty suffering of racism, transphobia, homophobia, sexism, et cetera, right? So along those lines, I think there's a lot of work to do in Dharma circles in making our spaces more inclusive. I think we're guilty of what David was saying. We have people enter our spaces who are Black and interested in the practice. And I think a lot of people don't do what we ought to do, is just say, hey, I don't think I've seen you around before. Like, I want to get to know you. What's your name, or why are you interested in the practice? Or like, what are you learning through your own experience of the practice, right? Lama Rod says in one of his books, what I experience is in being in places where I feel there's no space of consideration for how social oppression colors the way I need Dharma to be transmitted. And moreover, I think that gets back to the fact that a lot of the people transmitting Dharma to, in the West are white. And what a lot of Black practitioners are saying is they'd like to see more people speaking to, right, this form of suffering, of racism. In the Asalayana Sutta, it's the teaching most people will refer to for the Buddha's teaching on racism. And in it, he engages in a dialogue with a Brahmin who was at the top of the ancient Indian caste system. And there is an element of colorism to the ancient Indian caste system, with the deletes on the bottom, generally, for the most part, being the most dark-skinned in society. And you can look up the sutta, it's really good. But basically, the Buddha goes through and knocks down logically all the different ways this Brahmin is trying to prop up this idea of the caste system. And I think what I'd like to close with is just offering an excerpt from a 2015 statement released by a who's who of Buddhist leaders following the murder of Michael Brown in Ferguson. They said, Buddhist teachings are grounded in a clear recognition of suffering, an ethical commitment to non-harming, and an understanding of interdependence. We can't separate our personal healing and transformation from that of our larger society. The historic continued suffering of people of color in this country is our collective suffering. The harm caused daily is our collective responsibility. Once we see this suffering, our freedom unfolds as we respond with a wise and compassionate heart. That's all I have for you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tangjin. Really appreciate your observations and sharing as well. Um, really, really wonderful presentations from all three of you tonight. And it looks like the chat has been quite active. So Mary Jane, I am going to turn things over to you now to moderate the Q&A time. As I said, it looks like there's a lot of questions. So I just asked the speakers to try to be succinct, if possible, in your answers so we can get through as many questions as possible. Any questions we don't get to before needing to go into breakout, we will send you and ask for your responses so we can get those out to everybody in the packet. Mary Jane, go ahead.
Good evening. The first question is for all three of you, and it is, if you're speaking to a person of faith, either your own or another person's, how can you begin to invite a conversation about race if they have a different idea about race than you do? And let's go in the same order as the speakers. So let's start with Zahabia.
So I think this is just how you would talk to anybody about race, right? Like anybody that you encountered. I think narrative and story and relationship building is important. So finding points of connection in your life and maybe getting to know that person a little bit and getting to know a little bit about why they don't believe in racism or whatever might be my approach to doing this. That being said, I think there are people who aren't there yet, and I have to decide whether I have time or not. So I'm going to turn it over to David because I think he wants to go.
And do I want to go? All right. Okay, so engaging Jews in this topic and engaging people from other faith traditions. So I told you all that parents have come to me to make my life hard, and they want to have coffees, like this peace offering. We're going to have a coffee, but really they want to yell at me. And what I love this belief that we have to meet people where they are. And with Jewish people, I start talking about the Holocaust. I start talking about anti-Semitism. I talk about prejudice. And I talk about how, as Jewish people, it is our biblical and spiritual duty to speak on behalf of other people who are experiencing prejudice, and how can we lift up the voices of other people who are experiencing the kind of prejudice and discrimination that we are. It's such a trick. Like, they're fine. I mean, Mrs. Bernstein is enjoying all the wonderful things of this world, but it's that way I sort of disarm them. Now, with people who are not from the Jewish tradition, again, I use the same tactic of trying to find where can this person and I agree on a value and a concept. But first and foremost, I am respecting that person. I am showing that person respect, and I am letting them know that I hear their thoughts. So I actually think I probably begin always by saying, I totally get what you're saying. I hear what you're saying. That makes complete sense to me. I get it. You feel blah, 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 blah. So now they feel like I'm listening to them. See, it's this pastoral counseling trick I have. And again, it comes from a place of respect. This person is not a bigot. This person is not an asshole. This person is not mean. This is a good human being. And I am trying to engage this person in a conversation where I respect where they are, but I'm going to explain to them how I feel a little bit differently.
So taking the same perspective as David, I think so if I were to talk, when talking with another Buddhist, a lot of what I just said is what I would say to some degree. I think a lot of what I just said was just how to respond to the topic when raised with other Buddhists. With people of other faith traditions. I think especially if their objections or the disagreement lies in their other tradition. I'm not sure if I can respond to specifically how I think I might respond, but I think similar to what David said, in these encounters, what it goes back to me, comes back to for me is remembering in Mahayana Buddhism, we have this idea that everyone has intrinsic Buddha nature. Everyone has the capacity for wisdom and compassion within themselves at any given moment. And that this person is not inherently evil, wicked, a fool, et cetera, and that they must have come to their conclusions somehow. So really trying to parse that out with them and respecting them for where they're at and where they're coming from. And that's what I got. Trying to be concise.
Thank you. The next question is for David. David, racism is about power. How do you represent power to impose over people? That's the way the question is written. And since Jewish isn't colorism, why does the Ashkenazis act as they are better than non-white Jews?
Okay, I'm going to start off by saying that I read that and I was confused. I'm gonna reread it in hopes that my brain puts it together a little bit better. Well, the only part of that I understood, well, was that last sentence. Oh boy, why do the Ashkenazi? So Ashkenazi Jew, I can at least answer this. An Ashkenazi Jew is a Jew whose ancestors are from Eastern Europe. They're from the Ashkenaz region. Act as if they are better than. Well, you know, I don't think that a Ashkenazi Jew would say that he is better than, because we all know that's not a nice thing to say. But I think there's this concept that white Jewish people have suffered, and that can't be disputed. You know, the Holocaust killed 6 million of us. And there's this sense that if you did not suffer, you haven't earned. You know, and me as a person who passes for white everywhere I go, you know, I sense this sense of like, you aren't suffering from racism every day, so how can you claim to be Black? And I think, first off, a Jewish person feels very special, feels that we are the chosen people. And when someone, however, a Jewish person does generally feel like they're not part of the major point of society. We are not Christians. You know, they have a Christmas tree at the White House that is a hell of a lot bigger than the menorah. But you don't belong. And I think a Jewish person wants to feel prideful that they are Jewish, and a Black person is another minority. And perhaps they are felt to get their own specialness. I think that's the best answer I've got for this moment in time.
Thank you. The next question is for Tongan. Since Buddha was of African background historically, is it ever brought up to the followers or put on the back burner here in America, as most Buddhists are white Americans?
Okay, interesting question. I would be interested in hearing information or an argument for the Buddha being of African origin, because that's not something I was aware of. Traditionally, it's held that the Buddha was a prince in the Kshatriya class in the Hindi northeastern area of what we call India today. And he belonged to a clan called the Shakya clan. They were like a small petty kingdom in the foothills of the Himalayas.
Thank you. This next question is for all three of you. Isn't it the refusal to discuss race a form of spiritual bypass? Zahabia, why don't you
Yes.
start for us?
I think for sure. I think each of us has exhibited the true teachings that we hearken when we think about race, when we think about racism. And it is a form of spiritual bypass. You think you're doing all the other stuff so you don't have to address race. It's an inconvenience. It's something that you can just still do all the things and be a good Muslim or be a good Jew or be a good Buddhist without addressing those things. But I guess it depends on how fundamentally you think they are a part or how important they are to the core of your religion. For me, justice and social justice and equity and equality and looking and people feeling like the not being exploited, not having oppression, those are fundamental values that I hold, and that I think are fundamental to the religion as well. When Muslims go to perform the Hajj pilgrimage, you stand shoulder to shoulder. You could be standing with somebody who's like a billionaire. You could be standing next to somebody who's like, doesn't even know how they got there. They're just miraculously there because somebody paid for them to come or something like that. They could never have imagined being on the pilgrimage. So for us, honestly, there's so many places where it's just like God is like putting it in front of your face, like this is how you should be. You should be shoulder to shoulder with humanity, no matter who they are, and we just don't see it. And so I do think it's a form of spiritual bypass for sure. I think that's a phenomenal question as well.
Mary Jane, can you just ask that question again, please?
The question is, isn't the refusal to discuss race a form of spiritual bypass?
Okay, I don't really know what spiritual bypass is, so I'm going to answer what I think possibly this means. No, actually, no, that's probably not a good idea. What does that phrase mean, spiritual bypass? Anyone?
It means to bypass an issue, whether personal or collective, by just focusing on your spiritual life, like avoiding something using
Okay.
spirituality.
That's how I took it. I don't know if I was defining it right when I answered, but that's kind of how I took it. Yeah.
I mean, there's this avoidance of wanting to discuss racism, and I believe it comes from a place of guilt. And I'm not divorced from this concept. I could be doing a lot more. I drive down Madison Street, and as soon as I get into the black area, I'm seeing streetlights don't work. I'm seeing branches in the road. I'm seeing stop signs are sort of bent. Buildings are dilapidated, and this is the job of the city. And that is not a problem in East Grand Rapids. And I really do think I need to be going to the city council meetings. I need to be finding out who on earth my city councilors are. I need to be working with Black organizations. I need to be putting pressure on the politicians, and I'm not. So I can live with that guilt. But to say I'm not going to discuss it means I don't have the wherewithal to admit that I have a part in systemic racism. I'm not doing anything. When I lived in New York, like the subway stops that are in the Black neighborhoods look terrible. They smell like urine. And whose job is it to clean it up? It is the city's job. But they're not being cleaned up. But on 64th Street, Lexington Avenue, that's not a problem. And if you were to say to somebody who lives on Lexington Avenue, let's talk about race, they would say, I don't want to talk about it, because they know that they could be doing more. But I just think we should be comfortable with the uncomfortable. You know what? I could be doing a lot more. I'm going to own that, and I'm going to try to do better. But people don't have that ability. What do you think, Caleb?
Yes. The simple answer to the question is yes. But I know, like, like David says, it's something I'm definitely guilty of. I think it's a difficult line to toe, I think, in general, between like spiritual practice, because there's an aspect of it that can feel indulgent, right? Like there's a specific practice called Pure Land practice, or Pure Land Buddhism, that arose in China amongst peasant villagers, where all they would do is recite the name of one Buddha in hopes that they would be reincarnated in his realm and have just the space and the time, the circumstances to practice. So it arose out of the realization we don't even have time to practice, right? But in the modern world, thanks to, like, I don't know, air fryers and cars and stuff, we do have time to engage in a spiritual life, a spiritual practice. But that can be a source of refuge in the world, right? And a point of inspiration from which we can act, or it can be a point of escape. And that's a dangerous line, and one that's difficult to walk and difficult to perceive at times. I think you just have to be honest about your own motivations.
Thank you. Here's the last question, and we're going to ask if you might be able to answer in about 30 seconds, which actually seems quite unfair. So if you have more to add to this later, plus there's at least 2 more questions that we'll include in the follow-up packet. The question is, can you give examples of racially based abuses of power in your faith traditions? Someone's assuming it's similar to what we might see in Christianity. So commenting on racially based abuses of power in your faith traditions.
I have an answer, even though this is out of order, just because I think this is my stomach gurgled up like, what am I going to say? So I'm going to maybe give Zahavi a chance to collect your thoughts. Okay, this is what occurred to me. I don't know if this is the answer. When in Judaism, we talk about matzo ball soup is Jewish, kugel is Jewish, brisket is Jewish, this music is Jewish. What that does is it erases the identity of Ethiopian Jews, or of Sudanese, or of Ugandan Jews, because, you know, Ugandan Jews, they're not about the matzo ball soup. And what it does is it then, when we talk about an abuse of power, it makes those Jews feel that they don't belong. And it reinforces to everyone in that space that the white Jews, that this is the standard and everything else is exotic and other. And there's just, it reminds me of the trans community. You know, in our Jewish texts, it's always every man and woman, and it erases all the trans people. And if we were to alter that language, the trans people now feel like they can have a seat at the table. So that Ugandan Jew, that trans Jew cannot be a person in power.
I am going to have to look up an answer to this, but all the stuff David said about culture and all of that is so true, completely 100%. Like I said in my presentation, we defer to the Arab, we defer to the Arabic, we defer to that culture as being our cornerstone. So if you're not, then you're automatically not good enough. And that happens so much with judgment of people's, how well they speak Arabic as well. In reciting the Quran and stuff like that. There's a lot of judgment on that, even though we have prime examples of people doing the call to prayers and other things that were not done in perfect Arabic, but they were very beloved, you know, because of just the heart, the feeling that was behind it. So yes, to all of that. And I'm going to try to come up with more, maybe.
I don't,
Did
we just
we
lose Tangjin?
Tanjin? I don't know. I don't see him anymore. Oh no, maybe he fell off the call.
He seemed to have frozen for a moment, so hopefully he'll rejoin us. Um, Thank you very much. Wonderful questions, great, thoughtful responses. Those questions that we did not get a chance to hear an answer for, we are sending to the speakers. We're asking them to respond to us within 24 hours. So when we send the packet out of this whole meeting, it'll include those answers. And if you have additional questions tonight, feel free to add those to the chat, and we will send those to the speakers afterward. Now we're going to go into our breakout rooms. And each breakout room has a facilitator. The first question is going to be about what you learned tonight, what maybe surprised you. And I'm going to put you into groups. Occasionally, I have to do this kind of random assignment. And so if the rooms are unbalanced, I might take you and move you into another room to get more equal. So there might be a little bit of shuffling the first 30 seconds or so, and then we'll sift into place. Again, there is a facilitator who knows they're the facilitator in your group that will lead everything. And so with that first question, a brief introduction and what did you learn? We'll take 7 minutes for that question. And I'm going to send you to your breakout rooms right now. What we want to do now is a quick reporting out. We want each of the facilitators to share one idea that came up for question number 3. What can we do? Kind of an action item. So just a soundbite answer from each of the rooms. And because we lost Mary Grillo tonight, we don't have room 1. So Carrie, can you give us an action item from group 2?
Sure, we had a great discussion, a lot of good ideas, but being bold and inquiring with others, whether it's within your religion or other religions, and engaging in the talk like we're doing tonight, but to keep that going.
Okay, keep it going. Thank you, Carrie, and thank you, group 2. How about Greg in group 3?
Thanks, Barbara. Yeah, we had a great conversation, and we're fortunate to have Caleb join us as well, which was nice. One thing that came out on question 3 was many of us were inspired to reach out to other faith communities and kind of start to forge a relationship with other faith communities, something that maybe hadn't been kind of top of mind prior to tonight.
Wonderful. Great. Thank you, Greg in group 3. How about Holly in group 4?
Yeah, we were fortunate to have Zahabia with us, and one of the things that we talked about in terms of taking action was just really paying attention to the language that we use. Now during the winter season, and there are a lot of different holidays, we don't all celebrate the same holidays and we don't celebrate them in the same way. So it's a good time to really pay attention to our language and make sure we're being inclusive, because our neighbors really appreciate that.
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you for that suggestion, group 4 and Holly. How about Mary Jane in group 5?
Our group talked about the way the panelists modeled interfaith dialogue with warmth and kindness, and they were able to draw back on their religion to talk about anti-oppression, and that we should do the same.
Okay, great. Follow the example. Thank you, group 5 and Mary Jane. How about Monica, group 6?
We had a real meaty conversation, thank you. And our closing thoughts were really each of us committing to an increased willingness to push our own scope of knowledge and experience and to push others around us. And one suggestion along that line was just letting our neighbors know about the Momentum Center and these anti-racism task force town halls, that we felt that was a pretty low threshold to just enter this conversation to help widen their scope.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you, group 6 and Monica. And how about Caleb in group 7?
The big takeaway for us was just studying history, especially white history and American history. The more that we understand where whiteness came from and how it came about, the better we can, understand where we find ourselves today.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you, group 7 and Caleb. And all of these suggestions and anything that was brought up we will be debriefing and going over suggestions with the Anti-Racism Task Force tomorrow. So just a reminder for facilitators to send your notes from your chat to get those out to us also as you wrap up, whether you put it in the chat or send an email, try to get that to us right away. We are going to have a couple of polling questions now. And the first one is just a post poll asking similar questions to how we started. Is racism present in our community? Not at all, minimally, somewhat, regularly, or always? And how comfortable talking about racism do you feel now compared to when we started? The same, more comfortable, or less comfortable? You just answer those 2 questions and hit submit. And we'll leave that up for a few more seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. We got almost all of you. And let me share those results. Is racism present? 3% somewhat, 9% regularly, 88% are seeing it as a systemic issue. And we have 41% who feel as comfortable as they started talking about racism, and 59% feeling more comfortable having that conversation. That's really good feedback for us to have. The next question is an evaluation question. How helpful was this town hall? Was it not at all helpful? Did it make you more aware? Did it motivate you to action, or did it convince you to become or continue as a leader or an advocate? And all of these polling questions help us to continue to determine where we go and how we improve this process. And 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. We had one person who did not find it helpful. I am sorry that that's the case, but we had everybody else found it to be helpful in some way. 52% were made more aware, 30% were motivated to take action, and 39% were convinced to become or continue as a leader. The next question is about another town hall. Would you be interested in participating in additional town hall meetings on race and racism? And if so, what topics would you like to see addressed? In this one, you can pick all of the topics that would interest you. Organizations that are addressing racism, historical instances of racism in the Tri-Cities, local government actions and reactions, business and the economics of race, implicit bias, white privilege, racism and healthcare, racism and mental health care. You can choose all of those that you'd be interested in. And again, make sure you hit submit after you note your selections. And because there's several of them, I'm going to leave this up a little while longer. And we'll give it 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So ending that poll, 100% said that they would participate in another town hall. So that's always encouraging. And it looks like the primary areas of interest and conversation would be around organizations that are addressing racism and local businesses and the economics of race. Really, really helpful feedback as we continue to plan our series of town halls. The next one is about a conference. So one of the suggestions that has come up from this series on religion and racism is the possibility of having a full conference. And we've started conversations with the Kauffman Institute to be able to put on a conference dealing with racism and religion. So the question is whether you'd be interested in a conference, yes, no, or yes, and you'd be willing to help plan that conference. And I should have noted at the beginning that Kauffman is a co-sponsor with this whole series on religion and racism. Really, really wonderful organization, and just it's been such a delight to work with them and to continue doing so. So the results here show that 79% would be interested in that conference, and 10% would be interested in planning. So thank you for that. And then I think there's one last question. Yes, what action are you willing to take now that you have attended this town hall? Read, listen to podcasts, watch documentaries to learn more. And again, you can answer multiple choice with this. Engage in more conversations about race and racism. Engage in more conversations with people who are of a different race. Get additional training from a long talk. Support DEI initiatives in schools or businesses. Attend implicit bias training. Get involved in local government. Donate to a group working in this area. Join a community book club, or invite others. And I'm not seeing any numbers going. So I'm wondering, is this poll not showing up?
Barbara,
Showed up, but it disappeared.
but for some reason, it's not letting us submit.
It's not.
Let
Let me end it and we'll try it again. I relaunched it. Is it allowing you now?
Better.
We'll see. It still shows me 0. Oh, there we go. All right. So I left off with attending implicit bias training, getting involved in local government, donating to a group working in racial justice, joining a community book club, inviting other people. And I heard one of the groups say that that's what they want to do, is start inviting other people to these town halls. So give you another moment to answer this. Choose all that apply. And I'll close it in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So the highest scores here are for engaging in more conversations about race and with people of a different race. I'm just scrolling down to give you an idea of where things lined up. And these poll results will also be part of the packet that everybody receives. So in terms of next steps, let me get back to my slides. I'm going to stop sharing a moment. There we go. Next steps, we will send this recording, all of the slides, the questions that still need to be answered, the chat, recommendations that were put there, all of that will go out in a packet to you. And our goal is always to have that sent by the end of the week. And then we also will be reviewing the feedback we received from tonight and planning tomorrow at the Anti-Racism Task Force meeting. What can you do as a next step? If you go to the Anti-Racism Task Force page, there's an opportunity to click the button and read, watch, reflect. So you can share your thoughts, your impressions, your ideas of this conversation tonight, or any other work that you've been doing or material you've been reviewing. The report and action button is an opportunity to tell us what you've done. Tonight you said what you were willing to do. This is a place to be able to record what you've actually done. And don't think of any action as too small. If you read that article, listen to that podcast, report it. It's a way that we can let each other know that we're all continuing to be involved and engaged in this work, that we're not alone. There's also on that page a button to support the Ottawa County DEI initiatives, which is something we've been actively working to support. And we will be presenting signatures in support of DEI at the County Commission meeting January 11th. So if you have not signed that document, please take a look at it, and I hope that you will sign it. I want to invite you to the next town hall. We normally meet on the fourth Monday of every month. We changed it for November and December because of the holidays, but we'll be returning to that fourth Monday next month. So January 24th, fourth Monday of January, and we're continuing the series by talking about Christianity and Native and Indigenous people. Really looking forward to this conversation as well, and I hope you all can be present to join us. Now, a huge thank you to everybody, but particularly our speakers, our panelists tonight, Zahabia, David, and Tongjin. I messed your name up again. I thought I changed it all the way through. So grateful for all three of you. Really, really powerful sharing, instructive, informative, and couldn't be more grateful for your willingness to share. Also want to thank all of our facilitators tonight, Joanne, who has been keeping time, Holly, who's been recording answers to polling questions, Mary Jane for question and answers, and to each member of the community who participated in the breakout conversations today, which is where the real work of this town hall takes place. So I'm very grateful. I hope you will join us next month. If you have questions, if you'd like to become a facilitator, or if you'd like to join the Anti-Racism Task Force, please contact me. This is our website. You can contact me there, Barbara at MomentumCenterGH.org. We would love to have you as part of this work. Until next month, the divine in me recognizes and bows to the divine in you. Namaste.